Hey there, pen fans. Brian Goulet here from gouletpens.com. Here for another episode of Goulet Q&A number 314 this week. I'm a little under the weather, so I'm just coming out of it. But if my voice sounds a little weird or I cough here and there, just know that I'm okay. I'm just coming on the other side of something. I think I had a little cold or just a little sinus thing, which is not unusual this time of year. But let's see here. What are we talking about today? So I'm going to be helping to diagnose a pen that starts out fine, but then dries up as it writes. If I'm concerned about handwriting for documents of future historical significance and what inks and paper can help assist with that. The best nibs for onion skin paper. If you've never heard of that, you're not alone. And then if fountain pen users are more purposeful in their writing. And then the size nib that's the most popular in the world, like number 4, 5, 6, whatever. And then I'm going to be spotlighting the new Monteverde Aquatic inks that we came out with last week. So it'll be a good time. Hope you enjoy it. And we'll start off with feedback. All right, first up from James Kerr says, regarding mixing inks. On the bottle I have of the Jacques Hermon ink, the side panel has this note in both French and English. Never mix two different inks. I've often wondered what would happen if I did. I have lived to tell the tale. Jacques Hermon's Liard Sauvage is one of my favorite inks. It was a bit too light colored in my green Kaweco Classic Sport with a fine nib. So I added a couple of drops of Diamine Sherwood green and voila, a nice darker green that writes beautifully and shows well with the fine nib. Well, I think that you've done a huge disgrace. I'm just kidding. Again, like if you mix two different inks, you can potentially have some kind of unforeseen outcome. But in my experience, those are kind of rare and far between. Usually what you might get is just an ink that doesn't maybe flow as well or the color looks kind of muddy. In very rare instances, if you're mixing like very different properties of inks, you can end up with some that look kind of like congeal or maybe like don't blend well together. But a couple of drops like this, like you have here, it's pretty low risk. You know, you're taking your life into your own hands as you do this. I think Jacques Hermon is probably, you know, just covering their butts while saying that. You know, and I'm an authorized retailer, so I will say you should never mix two different inks per their suggestions. However, I will also say it's your ink and you own it and you do whatever you want to do with it. Just don't go after J or Bond for whatever happens. So your mileage will vary. But basically, I always say if you're going to try mixing inks, do it separately, like do it in a vial separately, mix it up, let it sit there for, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever you feel comfortable with. If nothing crazy happens to it, it doesn't start foaming and melt the vial that you're putting it in, then you're probably going to be okay. But, using it in a pen that is not super significant or important to you, a very replaceable one like a green Classic Sport with a fine nib. Worst case, if something crazy happens, you're not out a huge loss. All right. Marvin Mediocre says, for extra fine nibs, there's also the Pilot Kakuno. So this is my question last week about fine nibs. This can be swapped on a Metropolitan or an Explorer. The medium fine nib on a Sailor 1911 Compass is comparable to the extra fine Platinum Preppy, although Goulet no longer carries this pen. We don't carry that pen anymore. So there's lots of pens called the Compass. The Compass was kind of like a whole collection, but this was the old sort of translucent one that we had in a bunch of different colors. That got essentially replaced by the Tutsu Adjust. So we don't have that one anymore, but I totally forgot about the extra fine nib on the Kakuno. That's a great idea, is to swap those nibs because all the Pilot's stainless steel nibs are basically identical and you can swap them between all the pens, with the exception of, a couple of their pens like the Varsity and the Parallel, but all the ones that look the same are swappable. So that's pretty low risk. Kakuno is a pretty affordable pen. Honestly, it's like cheaper than spare nibs from other brands. Like you get the whole pen. So yeah, you can swap that out. That's a great idea. I'm glad you mentioned it. This one is from Tiasta Affordugan. Sorry, I butchered that. But a fun video would be to take the most viewed pens, but the least bought, and then the least viewed pens. I'm a data science marketing nerd, and I'm always interested in what people aren't buying. Obviously, the expensive pens we all look at and not buy, but I bet there are some diamonds in the rough. Great video as always. This would require a little bit of digging because obviously the things that stand out the most are the things that sell really well. But there is no one system to really look up what you're asking for. So it would require a bit of data massaging. It's data that we more or less would be able to get, because it's like aggregated in terms of like which of our product pages get the most views and hits and stuff like that, and in that time frame, which sell the best. So it's something we could calculate, but honestly, there's so many pens, it would take us a while to really do all that compilation. So I don't have that data for you, I'm sorry. But I can pretty much tell you, just based on my experience, that pretty much any really expensive limited edition is going to fall into that category because they're really interesting. A lot of times they have really compelling themes, and they're just like, people want to window shop and look and see like, wow, what is this? It's sort of like, I don't know, like you have like, the designers that have like clothing on the red carpet or like fashion shows and stuff. Nobody's actually wearing those clothes, like really, but everybody wants to see them, right? Nobody's buying like these crazy dresses and suits and stuff like that you see at these types of events. But, I think the like really high-end limited edition, heavily themed fountain pens probably fall into that category too. Let's see here. What else we got? Ann Wagner says, "Hi, Brian. I think it would be cool if you make a video about inks that change color as they dry. You mentioned this phenomenon in a recent video, and I'd be really curious to see some examples in action." Yes, a video about watching ink dry. Yes, thrilling. My favorite example in my own small ink collection is Diatramentis Document Green Gray. But I bet there are lots more dramatic inks with heavy sheening, etc. Thanks for considering it. Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is why I love doing the ink showdowns too, because it does show that quite a lot. In fact, I have an ink showdown that's just come out this week on dark green inks, and it has a little bit of that too. So yeah, ink can look very different when it's first down versus when it dries. And it's crazy because some inks will lighten up as they dry, other ones will darken as they dry. It just depends on the properties of the ink. But yeah, there are some that, especially if it's got like a sheen or shimmer or something like that, a lot of times those properties won't come out until it has dried. So you can get some really interesting results. And that's honestly, for me personally, that's one of the most compelling things about using fountain pens, is using all these different colors of ink. And it's not just like, what does the ink look like after it's dry, but what does it look like as it goes down? That's why I love really heavily shading inks, because as you're writing, the ink is like pooling up and just doing really interesting things as you're putting it down on the page, and then to see it kind of as it dries and transforms and stuff. So it's a great idea. I don't know that I've done a video specifically on inks that change color as they dry. I've certainly talked about it and pointed it out in basically every ink showdown that I've done, but I haven't highlighted it specifically for that. So I love the idea. I'm overwhelmed by the number of options of inks that could fit in that category. So I'll have to give it some thought. But if anybody has any suggestions, please let me know. Let me know in the comments what inks that you think are really dramatic in terms of how it goes down and what color it ends up being when it's dry. I don't know, it could be kind of fun. I could do like a time lapse sort of a thing probably with that, and maybe speed it along. And I have to think about how to do that, in a way that would be, more exciting than watching ink dry. Or maybe I just lean into that and I just make like one of those, YouTube like 10-hour videos. Have you ever seen those? Like my kids, not so much anymore, but when they were younger, they would pull up like these videos of just like the same song on repeat for like 10 hours or whatever, or there's like videos of like a fire crackling, and you just like put it on your TV and just watch it for 10 or 12 hours a day in the background. It's, maybe it could be something like that. Maybe it could just like a 10-hour video of fountain pen ink drying. That's really funny. Actually, I like that idea as I'm saying it. It'd be really funny to do a 10-hour ink drying video, but then I would have to do it for 10 hours. So I don't know, maybe that would be kind of insane. But anyway, thanks for the idea. I'll give it some thought. And then lastly, we have Kirk Wilson says, one of the best things about the special editions that you do with Edison is that because all Edisons that use a number 6 nib use the same nib unit. You can buy the pen with any nib size and then get a couple more nib units at like $25 a pop. I have 2 Edisons and I have all the nib sizes. So either pen can be basically any nib size and I can switch it up. Yeah, that's really cool. That's why we offer that. That's why Edison offers that too, is because, Edison pens, they're not the most, they're very fairly priced, but they're not, like Lamy Safari pricing. So, not everybody has a full collection of every nib size of Edison. So it's really cool that they offer the separate nib units because they are really easy to switch out. And they've been the same nib units they've had ever since they started Edison. So any Edison that you bought over the last 20 years, basically, that they've done will have swappable nib units, as long as it's the right size. They have a number 5 and a number 6, but as long as it's the right size, you can still swap it out. So that's super cool. Anyway, thank you for that feedback, everybody. Let's talk about Let's talk about a couple of new things, shall we? All right, first pen that we have up here, I wanted to show because I kept one of these suckers and I wanted to show you. It's really cool. This is Delta pen. This is part of a new collection that they're doing called Italian Songs. And the first one, Anema I Cuore, I hope I pronounced that right. This is a collaboration between us and Delta. So it's an exclusive that we have. Not a huge number of pens, but it's kind of special. It looks like it should be a much more expensive pen than it is. But we did it with a steel nib because we wanted it to be affordable. We know the prices are going crazy on a lot of things these days. So it's it looks like a limited edition kind of a thing. So it's basically like themed around Italian songs. And as the name would suggest. And it's really cool. So you can see here, it's got the lyrics from the song on here. They're not numbered. But they are going to be limited in their availability. So this specific pen is MSRP of $325, so we have it for $260. Now, that's not an insignificant amount of money, but for a genuine Delta with it, quite a few, I was going to say accoutrement, but I don't know, finishings, extra little things. It's got like nice trim rings and it's got a really cool, I don't know exactly what this is, but it's like a purple, almost looks like a kind of a gemstone type of effect here in the center band. And then there's a little sliver of it too on the actual pen body. So that's pretty cool. And, the lyrics on here, it's very, very slightly textured, but you don't really feel anything. It's nice and front weighted. It does have a metal grip, so it's not gonna be everybody's taste, but it's got a nice lip here that keeps it from sliding off. Number 6 nib, made by Yovo. So it's going to be a nice writing pen. It does post if you want to do that. I probably won't, but it's totally up to you. It's got some nice music notes with a staff here. So just nice little theming here. So if you want a limited edition pen without necessarily limited edition pricing, we have this available. And there will be future versions as well with different songs. Comes with a bottle of ink. This is Delta Black ink, 30 mil. It's a standard international cartridge converter. Comes with a converter, so not a bad little pen for $260. So really excited to have that come out. I'm really, really pleased with how it came out. It looks way better than I even thought it would. So I'm excited to have that personally. Let's see what else we got. I got a new Benu, a new Pixie. Literally just got this because Glenn was photographing it, and I have it now. So essentially what we did was we worked with Benu to do a Pixie-fied version of our exclusive that is called, oh my gosh, what is the name? Is iced caramel latte. Wow, totally blanked on the name for a second. So it's a little mini me. Isn't that fun? This is gonna be $72, just like the other Pixies, but it's a little mini version and it's adorable. So this is cartridge only, but you can eyedropper convert it as well. It just won't fit a converter because it's obviously very tiny, but cute little thing. Kind of meant to mimic the Big Brother. So yeah, that's fun. We have those available now. We did one run of them. I don't know if we'll make it an ongoing thing. If it sells really, really well and y'all want it and we just can't get enough, maybe we'll do more runs, but essentially worked with Benu and got like one batch of it because they have to make up the resins, and the resin that they have to make obviously is different for the different sizes because, if you made a pen that size out of this, it would not look the same. So they had to like mix like smaller rods and stuff like that. So it's a bit different, it's a bit more work, but they did a really good job with it. So I'm really happy with how that Pixie turned out. You can pick those up now. We have extra fine, fine, and medium. They're number 5 Schmidt nibs. And yeah, what else we got? We have Rhodia planners. I don't have these on my person, but we have some Rhodia planners with a new color that we are doing as an exclusive, I believe. Not 100% sure on that. I'm pretty sure. I know we asked to have it brought in, but it's a peacock color. So it's a nice like teal color. It's really, really cool looking. But they have 7 new colors. So this is their standard Rhodia annual planner. Format's really cool. 12 months. Yeah, kind of neat. So yeah, it's got Clairefontaine paper in it. It's really nice. And 90 gram Clairefontaine paper. So really good planners if you like these types of things, especially for fountain pens. Not all planners are good with fountain pens, because typically when they design planners, they want the paper to be very absorbent, because when you're writing with a planner, it's usually quick and you're on the go, but that's all right. You can put some blotter paper in there, you know, or a sheet of construction paper that we talked about a few weeks ago, and you're good to go. And then the last thing I had, this wasn't actually on my list, but I just got my hands on my own Conklin 1898 Bohemian Twilight. I believe I talked about these last week, but I just got mine. So I wanted to look at it myself and show it to you. This material is really cool. I love the depth of the material. This is a Jonathan Brooks resin, and yeah, it just looks great. So thrilled with that. And we have those available now. So go check it out. And it's an 1898. It's got the, you know, the clip on it like that, but it doesn't have the bands. We had the option to do, this is an exclusive of ours. We had the option to do the bands like the normal 1898. We didn't want to do that because we just wanted the material to be basically unbroken. So we just did as much of the material as we possibly could. So this is, you can appreciate it. So anyway, we have those. Go check them out. And let's get into the company update and then some questions. All right, company updates real quick. I really only have one. We have a dark green ink showdown video, and I kind of already said it. So do I even need to have this section in here this week? I don't know, but go watch that video. It's kind of cool. I'm really enjoying the ink showdowns. I've got some more lined up. I'm open to more suggestions as well. So let me know if you have any of those, and let's get into the questions now. Question number 1 from Fan Eero says, thanks, Brian, for the great video and all the documentation about the reseller's chain of supply and also about drums. You're very welcome. I do cover a wide swath of topics, don't I? Question, even with the juiciest pens, I have the same experience. After writing 4 or 5 pages in A5, I noticed that the nibs tend to dry up as if they were out of breath. I need to slightly prime the feeds, piston fillers mostly, so that everything gets back to normal. Any opinion on that? Well, I have an opinion on everything, so yes, I have an opinion. First thing, I'm just going to ask the obvious. Maybe they're just writing like they're actually supposed to write. And the first 4 or 5 pages is maybe because you flooded the feed or because you just filled the pen and it has more ink in that feed. And then by the time that runs out, maybe you're seeing what it actually writes like normally. So my curiosity would be, you know, is it just that you like wetter writing pens? Because I experienced that myself when I was first using fountain pens. I thought like I would mash down on my nibs really hard because I wanted them to be wetter and darker and broader than they were, when in fact I just needed to use a broader nib size. So I wonder if maybe there's an ink or a pen thing there that you just want it to be something that's not. I'm not accusing you. I'm not blaming the victim, but I'm just posing the question. If you notice a commonality between that, you're like, oh, I never thought about that. Maybe that is a thing. That's just one thing to maybe ask. So yeah, you might just like really, really wet writers, and that's fine. I am similar. So assuming that that's not the case though, assuming there's something actually going on, what I would really be curious about is after you write for 4 or 5 pages, does it continue to write drier and drier and drier? Or does it kind of settle out and then write just the same, you know, essentially wetness from that point on? If it's writing with the same wetness from that point on very consistently after 4 or 5 pages, then I think what it is it's actually just oversaturated for the first 4 or 5 pages, probably from recently filling or when you flood the feed. And then the pen is actually writing a little more like it should. If that's doing that consistently across your pens, then I think that is actually what's happening. Now, if it's writing drier and drier as it goes, and then it gets to the point where it's like writing stingy and it's not writing well, then there might actually be a flow issue or something with the pen. So I'm going to get into that in just a second here, but I wanted to break it down a little bit. So when you have a flow issue like this, it can either be caused by the pen, the ink, the paper, maybe like the environment that you're in, or some combination of any of these. So should be very straightforward to troubleshoot, right? With so few factors involved. So if you've got ink that's not flowing consistently like this, there could be a potential restricted flow. It could be that maybe your pen hasn't been cleaned in a while. There's some stuff that's kind of built up in there, and when the feed is saturated and when you first fill it or whatever that might be, you have lots of ink right there at the feed, at the ready. That goes right to the nib, no problem. But then as the ink is starting to be drawn from the ink reservoir more consistently, it might be a little restricted in its flow. That's a pretty telltale sign that, like, basically I would say, like, first thing, just clean the pen thoroughly. Maybe consider using a pen flush or something like that, or put a little dish soap in your water as you go to clean it, just to assist in the cleaning a little bit. That would be like the easiest thing to do, to see if that changes anything for you. But if it's happening on a variety of pens, maybe that's the case. Maybe you're like me and your pen hygiene is not the best, and it just would benefit from cleaning. But maybe try that with like some of the worst offenders that you seem to have, and see if that helps. So yeah, thorough cleaning, maybe try some different like pen, ink, paper combos. See if there's any commonalities. That's really the thing. When you have an issue like this, there's some go-to things like cleaning the pen. Maybe it's that, there could be like some junk in the slit of the nib. You need to floss it out. That could be a thing. Sometimes paper fibers kind of build up in there, and that can restrict flow a bit. Over time, or maybe just the nib, is dried out or something like that. But see, the issue is typically if you have a restricted flow in the pen, a lot of times when that happens, it's happening kind of right out of the gate. In fact, it might actually be the worst when you first go to use a pen. And then as the ink gets flowing, it kind of works itself out more. That happens more when you're writing with a pen, you're like leaving it uncapped for a while, and it's sort of like drying out due to exposure to air. And then the wetness is still inside the pen with the ink, but it might need a little bit of prompting, a little assistance to kind of flood it to get it writing again if the nib has dried out due to just being exposed to the air. But that's kind of the opposite problem of what you're describing, which is, I think, interesting. So yeah, trying different pen, ink, paper combos, see if there's any commonalities between the ink that you're using, maybe the paper that it's on, the nib size of the pen, something like that. And then I would say, like, what ink are you using? Is it shimmering ink? Is it a pigmented ink? Any ink like that can flow, a little worse as it goes. Pigmented and shimmer inks, essentially, they're both kind of in the same boat. There's some particulate in the ink that can build up a little bit over time, especially as it dries. So, if you do leave the cap off every now and then, or just using the pen in general, especially with shimmer ink, they're a little higher maintenance. You got to flush them and clean them a little more regularly. So it could just be maybe you had some of that stuff in there and it needs to be cleaned out. Also, the freshness of your ink. I've used the same ink a whole bunch of times. I've had this happen sometimes where I've used the ink a whole bunch of times, or maybe sometimes I'm writing and I don't cap the bottle right away, and it's just getting exposed to a lot of air. Some of that water can be evaporating out of the bottle, and by the time you have used it for a long, long time, you could end up with a slightly more concentrated version of the ink, and it might actually need to be diluted a little bit more. A little bit of distilled water in there might reconstitute it a bit and get it to flow better. That can happen sometimes. If you're going to do that, try that in a small volume of ink first. Don't do the whole bottle, because then, you can't undo that. So yeah, do any of your inks work well in all of your pens? And it's just some of the inks are problematic. By switching pens and inks, that can be part of what can help diagnose that. If it's some inks and not others, that might be an ink issue. But if it's all of your inks are behaving the same way, then it's kind of narrowing down to maybe not an ink issue, it's maybe a pen or a paper issue. Paper-wise, what paper you're using. Sometimes the paper fibers, as I mentioned, can get built up in the slit of the nib. This is especially true on more fibrous paper that's not as smooth. And especially, papers like cotton paper and stuff like that, where it's, there's more, less of a heavy coating on it. That can definitely be the case. And toothier nibs as well might attract more of that. Cleaning will help with this, though. Flossing the tines certainly will help with that. And just cleaning in general will help clean that up. And then, storage and I'll also say, like, more ink-resistant paper, like a Tomoe River or something heavily coated. it's going to do really well at resisting ink, but what that also means is that if you have any type of flow issues or anything like that, it's not going to help. More absorbent paper is going to assist in sort of like pulling the ink out, because the ink is going to absorb down into the paper, and then the surface tension of the ink is going to assist the ink in flowing more. So you always have more ink flowing out of the pen where you're using a more absorbent paper. That probably seems pretty logical. More ink resistant paper, the ink will typically look darker, more saturated. The line will typically look finer on those as well. So it could be that maybe that's, I don't know what kind of paper you're using, but that's some of the factors that can be possible. And then last thing I kind of had was like storage or the environment. It can definitely be the case. This is a little less so with pens that start really wet and get dry. It's more with pens that start really dry and have a hard time starting, but your nib storage can definitely be a thing. If you store them vertically, on your desk like this, and the nib is pointed towards the sky, the ink in the pen is not making contact with the back of the feed. So unless you have a cap that seals pretty well, it's possible the nib could be kind of sort of drying out. Again, that's more of an issue with pens that have a hard time starting, but it can certainly be a thing. And then I generally, if I'm writing with my pens like pretty frequently, I'm okay storing them just for practical sake, a nib up like that. But the best way is to keep them horizontally or even nib down. But that's a little less practical, because you have clips, so it's like if you store the pen nib down, it's harder to get a nib or it's harder to get like a pen holder that's wide enough to accommodate that. Most of them are made to hold them standing up. But laying them horizontally is a little more practical, but that could be something you try. Maybe you just look at how you're storing it. And then the environment too, your relative humidity. We answered a question about this in Q&A a few weeks ago. That could also be a factor. So keep that in mind as well. All right. Good luck. I hope something I said here helps you out. But if you have more specific questions, reach out to my team and we can get you more details as well. All right. Next question. This is from Paul Servini. It says, I'm not sure if you're aware that historians are concerned about the lack of primary source material that future historians will be able to access, as fewer and fewer people use paper and pen. I have an extensive collection of correspondence, nothing earth-shattering, and certainly no literary gems, just descriptions of everyday life in the 20th and 21st century which people have sent me or I have written to others. So what about ink? Obviously, ink must stay readable over time as we have documents from past ages. But are all the inks equal as far as readability over time is concerned? What properties, if any, makes an ink longer lasting on the page? Does the paper make a difference? Is there any difference between ballpoint pens, gel pens, rollerballs, and fountain pens? Just some questions to be getting on with. Have fun. Thanks, Paul. No problem at all. I was tempted to deep dive a little bit, and I dipped my foot in the water, not just the toe, maybe up to my ankle. But then we're not going all in. So first thing, you got me thinking, like, let's zoom out a little bit here before we get into like the details of the ink and the paper and stuff, because I can answer that, but let's do that in a second. Let's talk about historical reference, right? Because we're living in a pretty unprecedented age. If we want to really zoom out, how important is writing things down for historical documentation? Well, like up to this point, or up to, 50, 100 years ago, it was incredibly important because you didn't have that many other ways to document what was happening in the world. Specifically primary source material, like, everyday stuff of people talking to each other, not like the decrees of a king or whatever of the days of yore, but just everyday people communicating. That really wasn't possible for extensive periods of history, except through verbal communication and like passing things down through stories and parables and stuff like that. But you're not getting like day to day, like how many eggs did somebody's chicken lay in September of whatever year that was. That wasn't relevant enough to pass down through auditory. So a lot of that history just went undocumented, and it is what it is. It's always helpful when we have some documentation around that kind of stuff that we can find, but it has to be something written down or in pictures or whatever, artwork that was done. But all that stuff was so burdensome to produce, and not a lot of people knew how to write anything for most of history. So you just didn't get any of those accounts. You got things that were, more produced, call it that, more official, because it took so much work or time or training or whatever expense to create that. So it's a really relatively new phenomenon that we have primary source material, right? I think mostly it's like once the printing press was invented, you had, that really changed society in so many ways, right? And, that really democratized communication in so many ways, and it changed so many different things. But really, what that did is that allowed books to be communicated, or just books, pamphlets, whatever, information to be communicated without it having to be handwritten anymore. So the burden of handwriting something was lessened. More people learned how to read. More people learned how to write. Eventually, as a result of that. And so, what used to be like a monk or a scribe or somebody who had to devote their life to being able to write things, got to the point where it was being taught in schools and people could write things on their own and document just everyday occurrences. So it's relatively recent in history that we even have the ability to do this. But then you think about what's come up in the last 150 years. Telegram, radio, typewriters, internet, computers, social media, smartphones. Now you've got like video, voice documentation, then you get into AI and all this other stuff. Like you have all of history, which very little of anything that happened was recorded in any way. And now I don't know how current this even is. This is like a stat that I'm pulling out from a couple of years ago. But it was something like the amount of pictures posted or the amount of pictures taken in like a 2-day span. I think it was in like 2010 or something, like 2015, whatever it was. Somewhat recently, the amount of pictures taken in like 2 days was more than all of the pictures taken prior in history. So it's like the amount of documentation that we have of primary source material. I mean, what is Instagram and TikTok and all these things? I mean, you have companies like us that are producing things, but like everyday people just posting stuff that's going on, that is still source material. I think we're going to have a bigger problem, actually, of parsing through the glut of documentation that everyday people are putting out to find out what's even relevant. That's going to be the bigger problem that we'll have. And maybe AI will help us find that solution somehow. I've experienced this in my own life with my kids. I have I know for a fact with like the DSLR camera and stuff like that, I have more than 40,000 pictures of my kids, which is a lot. Now they're not all great, and a lot of them are like just spray and pray, pictures, or it's like trying to get one of them not making a weird face and smiling and blinking or whatever. I would take like 15 pictures in one pose. But that all has to be parsed through, you know what I mean? And it's to the point where I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to have the time to even do this. And my kid's going to graduate, high school and be like, hey, you're an adult now. Here's, 80,000 pictures of your childhood. Good luck. They're not going to want to deal with that. They have a life to go build. So it is something I've been thinking about is like, there is too much documented now. But the problem is it's not thoughtfully documented. So that's actually the bigger problem I think that we're going to have in history is we're going to have all this source material and there's going to be just so much noise. We're not going to know what's relevant or important. So that is very interesting. So I think actually, I'm just positing this, maybe instead of handwriting being what used to be, what was sort of like the elites and the historians and stuff that were writing things with whatever filtration and biases of, victors of whatever wars and stuff like that could potentially have been, to then things kind of got democratized. Then everybody could write everything, but the pen was still like the most useful tool for a relatively small period of history, to be honest with you, in the 20th century. Now you've got an issue with most people aren't writing things down. So there's all these other ways that things are being communicated, but I think now it's actually going to be potentially people writing things down by hand is going to be more thoughtful and intentional, but it's much more personal, individually personal. So I don't know. I think it's a very interesting kind of ethereal question maybe of maybe it's that, yes, less will be written down by hand, but in this period of history with all of the other stuff that's being written down, maybe the stuff written down by hand will actually be more valuable and more important to keep. So anyway, You opened up Pandora's box by asking me a question, a hypothetical like this. But just me personally, I think there's something about physical stuff. As much as we have to communicate, look at this. I mean, how much time have I spent in front of a camera recording the stuff that comes out of my mouth, and y'all are watching it, and that's great. Like, it's an amazing. I would not have the life that I have and have the business that we have without that ability. But I mean, are my great grandchildren going to be parsing through 2,500 or more YouTube videos to understand my life? No, they're not going to have that kind of time. So if I want something meaningful to be passed down to my own progeny, I should probably write it down in a journal. And I don't know, when I sit down and watch a video, it is very meaningful, but when I get something that I know somebody wrote with, or I have like a physical thing that they made or did or wrote down, I have a different connection with that thing. And maybe it's not for everybody, but I mean, I don't think I'm alone in that. So I think in that respect, physical things for historical sake will continue to have a lot of meaning and importance. It's just there's going to be a glut of non-physical things that are going to be very noisy for us to parse through in history. So all that said, what ink and what paper will help to keep? That's really your questions. Ink. So ink, yes, it matters. It's not all the same. There are some important principles to understand if you're wanting to keep writing for longevity. There's some basics that you need to sort of lock down in terms of the materials that you use and also in terms of the way that it's stored. That if you understand these things, then some of the other stuff doesn't matter quite as much. Some really important things I would say for ink, but actually the storage stuff is really, really important, because if you have poor storage techniques, it doesn't really matter what ink or paper that you use. It's not going to last anyway. You got to keep things in a cool, dry place out of sunlight. That's pretty much what you got to do. Exposure to air and oxygen and other things like, toxic, not toxic, like pollutants in the air, like that thing can degrade stuff too. But really, if it's wet or if it's hot or whatever, that's just going to break it down. It doesn't matter what kind of ink you use if the paper doesn't last. And paper is primarily made of natural materials, organic materials. There are probably inorganic papers that you can use with certain inks and stuff like that. Is that going to be better? I don't really know. But most paper is going to be pulp-based, whether it's like a cotton or a wood pulp or something like that, with coating and sizing and various other things. So, some of the documents that we have that have lasted the longest have been vellum, which is like animal skin, basically dried animal skin. That will last longer than paper. So if you really are thinking like, I want this to last thousands of years, maybe vellum is the way to go. That's not really practical for most people, and it's probably not that important to you to go to that length. But you want to get good paper. So you want to get paper that is specifically paper that is, if it's called archival, that's a good sign. But you want pH neutral and acid free. Why does that matter? Because if you have acidic stuff in your paper, it's going to degrade it over time. Think specifically of like old newspapers. They get like really dry and crinkly and turn yellow. That's because they've used acids. Why have they used acids? Because they bleached the paper. So the wood pulp, I don't know if you've ever seen wood pulp or a tree or sawdust, they're not bright white. So if you want the wood pulp to look white and be able to like see what you're writing on and not have it look like sawdust, typically it gets bleached. If you're bleaching it, bleach is heavy basic. So they put an acid to try to neutralize the base. And oftentimes the paper ends up being acidic. There are techniques that you can use to not bleach and not have those acids as much. It takes different techniques to do that. It's more expensive, but that is better for archival quality. So pH neutral, acid free, those are good ways to go. Clairefontaine paper and rhodia paper is all that, which is why it costs more than regular paper. So that's a good place to start. But yeah, so paper is important, all those things. Ink, as far as ink goes, definitely keep it out of direct sunlight. Pretty much any liquid ink that you use is not going to be good in direct sunlight. it will degrade. Any dye-based ink is going to degrade in a relatively short period of time in direct sunlight. So it's pretty easy if you're using a notebook. Close the notebook. Voila, it's out of direct sunlight. Your ink is. So that's pretty straightforward. And more or less, if you're keeping proper storage, you have paper that's going to last you as long as you have a fighting chance. And the ink is not stored in direct sunlight. It's not actually that important, I don't think, in terms of what ink you use. There are some inks that are much more acidic. Some very popular inks, like some of like the Waterman inks and stuff that people think of as like, oh, these are the safest inks to use. Some of them are very, very acidic. It's kind of surprising. So you can do pH testing on your inks, but there are inks out there that will say pH neutral, and so you can just look out for those. But largely, if you're looking for any type of permanent or archival ink, you're in pretty good shape. I would even say that a pigmented ink is probably going to be the best for you because dye can break down with UV stuff, UV reaction. But pigments, much, much harder to do so. Just like if you have any type of paints or, art supplies that are meant to be like light fast, they're usually going to be some kind of pigment-based thing. So I would take that in consideration. There's definitely inks out there that are known to be more archival, waterproof, all those things. But you want to go with something, again, kind of pH neutral and some degree of permanence to it and store it well. And then as far as like ballpoints and rollerballs and gel pens and all that, I don't know as much of the chemistry involved in all of those. I would say all the same principles apply in terms of, storage and light fastness and all that. But I would say if you're going to use any of those types of products, they make ones that are specifically made to be more archival. And that's just what you would want to pick. So it's probably looking at black only color for those, but you can get, various things that are made to be more permanent, more archival and stuff like that. And I would imagine they may not say all the things like acid-free and pH neutral, all that, whatever. But I would imagine that that's taken into consideration with those types of products. So I don't have any suggestions of any of those to use, but basically just look for products that are specifically made to be archival. And that will be the best chance of being archival. Sounds very obvious as I sum it up like that, but that's pretty much what you're looking at. All right, good question. See, I told you ankle deep. I feel like that's what we did. Maybe partial shin on that one. But anyway, let's go to the next one. This is from Sister Golden Hair. Says, what is the best fountain pen nib to use on onion skin paper? Well, that sounds interesting, doesn't it? What the heck is onion skin paper? Is that paper made from onion skins? Because that seems like that would be kind of hard to make. No, it is not. I mean, I don't think so anyway. I believe it's called onion skin paper because if you've ever peeled an onion, it's very like thin and crinkly, the onion skin. And that's basically onion skin paper. If you've used Tomoe River 52 gram, I think that's generally considered to be like an onion skin paper. I don't believe that it's made out of anything special. It's just made to be very, very thin. The reason it was created originally, it was called airmail paper, because if you had to mail letters, physically mail letters, long distances, it gets expensive. The more expensive, the heavier it is. So they developed this really, really thin paper so that it weighed less, so that you could mail it and not have to pay as much. So if you ever see like airmail paper, that's generally what it is. Or it's also known as tracing paper. So it's just really thin paper that you can kind of see through. That's basically all it is. So there are some journals that you can get, onion skin journals and stuff like that. I don't have any experience with those. I Googled it and I found a couple of Reddit threads and, various things that like people have used them. And I think there's some people that are real fans of that type of paper. The interest in Tomoe River paper originally was designed to essentially be onion skin paper that was fountain pen friendly. So I don't believe all onion skin paper is particularly fountain pen friendly. So I think those who are really into like the super, super thin light paper, there's a bit of hunting that has to happen to be really good with fountain pens. And that's because the paper is going to be so thin that you're going to get a lot of see-through, a lot of ghosting, maybe some bleeding. And so it's going to really depend. So I don't know if I can make one blanket statement because, again, it's not like one specific paper. It's just basically really, really thin paper. So the best thing that you can do is just put less ink down on the page in order to prevent any of these ghosting or bleeding issues. So you want to use a thin nib, and you want to use, something that's not an absolute gusher. And then ink-wise, I think just, use something that's not prone to feathering a lot. Pigmented inks would actually be really good for that use because they dry more like on the surface instead of absorbing in. So I think those would be some of your best bets. But just a really fine, thin nib. I mean, that's Japanese nibs, extra fines and fines are really good for that kind of thing. You're not going to want to use like your gushiest, wettest flex nib on that really thin paper. It's just, you're really pushing the limits on what it's going to do. But yeah, that's pretty much what I got. I was like tearing my office apart trying to find some like non-Tomoe River paper. And in fact, I wanted to actually, while I'm at it here, let me show you what the heck I'm even talking about. So I have, if you've seen it in my ink showdowns, I use my Tomoe River loose sheets for that. In fact, I even have some little squares cut up already for my next showdown that I do. Just to show you a little difference of like what, if you're not familiar at all with anything I'm talking about here, I'll show you like, here's a sheet of Rhodia, 80 gram paper, and this is Tomoe River 52 gram paper. They look not that different on camera, but much thinner, much crinklier. Let me see what pen that I have that I can write with here. Got a TWSBI. It's inked up with, I don't know what ink I have in here. Writes really well on both papers. But the amount of like see-through that you might have on the back is going to be more noticeable on the thinner the paper gets, right? So you can see that coming through. Not as much on the Rhodia. So this is going to be better for writing on both sides of the page. But a lot of times if you're mailing letters, you might write on both sides of the page. That would actually be more cost effective. Use a thicker paper, but just write on both sides as opposed to this. Well, you can still write on both sides, just somebody might have to fight reading it. Maybe use a lighter color ink too. That could also work. I didn't write that down in my notes, but that is another thing. If you're using a really thin paper, if you're using a finer nib, less ink, lighter color ink, it's not going to show through as much on the back. But yeah, that's my advice. That's pretty much all it is. This is from Steam Dome. Great Q&A. I have a question. Do you think fountain pen users tend to approach writing in a more purposeful way? I find I spend a lot more time thinking about what it is I want to convey before I put pen to paper when writing with a fountain pen. I'm reading this question as, do you think people who use fountain pens are smarter or better than people who don't? And the answer is, of course. I'm totally joking. Totally joking. I would say yes and no. So I would say most writing with a fountain pen today, especially in the US, but probably in most parts of the world, it's not that you're picking up and writing with a fountain pen because it's just what happens to be laying around and it's the easiest thing to just pick up and write with. That's not really how it works in the world today. You're probably going to use some kind of ballpoint or whatever, a pencil, because those are just prolific and you can just look around in any pen cup or pencil cup anywhere and you'll find a Bic crystal or, something like that, or a number 2 pencil of some kind. So yeah, those are the things that you're going to write with. You're not particularly writing to be thoughtful about your writing experience. You're just writing as a utility to get something down on the page. If you're using a fountain pen, there's some degree, even if it's relatively convenient around you, there's some degree of you're making a choice to do that. So I would say you are already being more thoughtful about how and what you're writing. Maybe not necessarily directly, specifically the content that you're going to write, but you're being more intentional about your writing experience by choosing that fountain pen because it's not the most convenient thing that you could be writing with. So there is an intentional act to be writing that way. I would say there is definitely some fountain pen users that they just like the way that a fountain pen writes. they're not specifically writing anything different. They're just using it about their daily work and stuff like that. They just like the feel of the writing. I would still probably argue that if you are specifically writing with a fountain pen, if you're specifically writing with a pen, maybe not even just a fountain pen, if you're specifically writing with a pen that you really like to write with because of its feel and stuff like that, that is at least going to have some sort of like maybe secondary consequence of improving your mood, improving how much you like to write. You will maybe be compelled to write more, and therefore it could have some kind of downstream impact on what it is that you're writing. I could make that argument. I have no data to back that up. I'm just pontificating. With the fountain pen specifically, I know I personally have experienced it actually changes what and how I write, because the experience of writing with a fountain pen was so different to me, especially when I first started out, that I for sure changed what and how I wrote because of the pen experience specifically. And then one of the most drastic things that I immediately, this was like day one, first time I ever wrote with a fountain pen. And I remember it because I was an adult when it happened. I was 25. It was kind of as I was getting into this business. If you don't know my backstory, I was making pens first, rollerball pens, looking for the best writing pens that I could find, thinking only the context of rollerballs because that's all I knew. And then I sort of discovered fountain pens. And then when I wrote with a fountain pen for the first time, I was like, whoa, this blows every rollerball out of the water that I've ever tried. And this is what I've been looking for my whole life. But what immediately happened to me is I literally had not written in cursive since I was like third or fourth grade. I was block print, and just, camel case print primarily for my whole adult, later school and adult life. But as soon as I used a fountain pen, how smoothly it flowed, I was like, I want to write in cursive. I want to connect these letters. And that definitely changed how I wrote, because I never thought about how I wrote things down prior to that. It was pure utility. As soon as I started using a fountain pen, it changed how I wanted to write and how I wanted to communicate. And the print, the font that I wanted to write, the script that I wanted to write in, changed immediately for me. So that's been my experience. I don't know that everybody has experience that way, because certainly people don't write in cursive, but that was dramatic for me and very, very lasting, and it's changed to this day, So yeah, there's definitely an intentionality there that can happen. And I think, is it that like you're going to be more thoughtful and ponder and write things differently? Yeah, I'm sure that's going to happen to some degree. I know sometimes even just like a different nib size, a different whatever, a different color of ink might evoke a different feeling out of you that may draw out different things. I know from like somewhat of a utility standpoint, but like people that I know that are like novelists or, write short stories or poems or whatever, with their fountain pens might write, as they're kind of like drafting their stuff, they might write in a different color for different characters or to evoke different emotions or feelings or stuff like that. There's an intentional act right there, but yeah, for sure that's going to like trigger part of what might make them write differently if they're writing as a different character with a fountain pen of a different color, So it's like there's just so much more intentionality with fountain pens than there is for your typical person picking up a writing instrument. Not to say that's exclusive to fountain pens. There are very intentional people that write in all kinds of forms. But I would say, like, in general, fountain pen users are much more self-selecting in terms of being thoughtful writers. So it's not that you have to use fountain pens to be a thoughtful writer, or that only thoughtful writers use fountain pens. But I think it's just a natural consequence of somebody being thoughtful about their writing experience is that they might gravitate towards fountain pens. And then last question for this week, we have Jay Kumar Shash, who says, "Sir, what is the highest selling nib size in the world? Number 4, 5, 6, 8, hooded nib, etc." Oh my gosh, I am not omniscient. I do not know everything. Is it omniscient or omnipotent? Maybe it's both. Omnipotent? Does that mean you know everything? Oh gosh, I need to look that up. That's going to bother me. Sorry. Cue the Brian Googles something while all of you are yelling at the screen. Omniscient. Oh gosh, how do you even spell that? Omniscient, knowing everything. Okay, what is omnipotent then? Omnipotent? Of a deity, having unlimited power, able to do anything. Okay, so I'm certainly not omnipotent. Definitely not omniscient either. If I was omniscient, then I would have known the definition for omniscient, wouldn't I? Boy, that was ironic, having to look that up. Anyway, what was I even talking about? I totally derailed myself there. Highest selling nib size. Oh yeah, I do not know what is the highest selling thing in the world. You know, I've devoted 15, 16, 17 years of my life to fountain pens, or just pens in general, but like fountain pens specifically, 16 years. And even still, I consider Goulet pens to be a flea of a speck of dust, you know, in terms of the global writing world or whatever the heck. So I don't even pretend to know what is going on globally. There's no industry data or anything, especially something this specific. So all I can do is speculate, just like you can. Maybe I have a slightly more informed speculation. I have no idea. But what I can probably guess is that while I think the number 6 nib is more sought after and appealing in a lot of ways to people who are like really devoted to fountain pens. I know we sell number 6 nibs, and that is something that is desired pretty regularly. But I think if I like pulled some numbers, and I didn't, but I think if I did, I would find that actually isn't what is the top seller, because they're bigger nibs, they're more work, they're more expensive. They come on pens that are slightly bigger, that are going to be more expensive. Just due strictly to the economy and availability, number 6 are not going to be the best selling. Certainly not number 8. I don't know if there's like a specific size, because again, like number 4, 5, 6, those are somewhat standardized. But think about the pens that do not have specific, like their proprietary nibs, brands like Pilot, Lamy, Platinum, things like that. So if I had to think about like what we probably sell the most of, I'm thinking things like the Platinum Preppy, proprietary nib, but it's going to be smaller. Pilot Metropolitan, that's like a number 4 or number 5 size. TWSBI Eco, that's number 4 size. TWSBI 580, that's number 5 size. Lamy Safari, I don't know what nib size that is. It's closer to like a Platinum Preppy, but probably closer to a 4 or maybe smaller. So again, and, you know, Diplomat Magnum, you know, things like that, they're going to be smaller nib pens. That's because they're going to be more affordable. And so I would say that probably higher volume of pens would be pens with slightly smaller nibs, not tiny, tiny nibs, but pens that are in the more like number 4, number 5 size. You know, think about like your Quakos, things like that. A lot of them are smaller, which is why I think when you get into more like sought after, you know, kind of grail pens and things like that, you're getting into bigger nibs because they're less common on the smaller pens and they stand out more, and you can do cooler designs on the nib and stuff like that. So yeah, I think, you know, it was kind of interesting, a thought exercise for me to go through thinking about that. So I have no idea specifically which nib size would be the top seller, but it would probably be something on the smaller end just because of practicality. Interesting questions this week. Thank you everybody for asking those. Do a quick spotlight on the aquatic inks up next. All right, here we go. These are our new inks that we have from Monteverde. These are Goulet exclusives. We worked with them to design these. This is a 3-pack. This is a super special packaging that we do for the 3-pack. This set, it's like $2 cheaper. But you get all 3 and it's $2 cheaper, and you get this glass thing. They are shimmering inks. You can sort of see it shimmering a little bit in the back there. Let me open these things up so that I can pull them out. Ta-da! 30 ml bottles of ink. Individually, you're looking at, oh my gosh, what is the price? I should know this off the top of my head. I think I know it, I just don't want to say the wrong thing. $14 is about, I'm 99% sure that it is. But we've had so many price changes recently. I just want to make sure. Oh my gosh, and I don't have it pulled up. I got to like navigate through the whole website. Blah, 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 blah. Ink. Here we go. I'll tell you right now. Here it comes, folks. Here it comes. It's coming. Why can't I find it? There's so many Monteverde inks. I should have just searched for it. Okay. It's like not coming up as most popular because it's new. $14. Yes, I was correct. Cool. $36 for the set. Wow. Wish I'd researched that before. It's a Monday. I'm recording this. I had a long weekend where I was kind of sick, so please forgive me. Anyway, we have 3 colors. Betafish blue, parrotfish purple, tide pool teal. We're calling it the Aquatic Collection because it's all sort of fish themed. Fish or ocean or water themed, whatever. So they are all pigmented inks. They didn't start out that way though. I thought this would be kind of fun. I was like, what would make this an interesting thing rather than just showing you swabs that we already have on our website? I wanted to show you the original samples that we did. So these were just to try to get the colors right, but we were not thinking shimmer at that point. So I have the original, we did it on a couple of different types of paper because we wanted to get an idea of the colors. We ended up tweaking a little bit to separate the teal from the blue because they started out kind of similar. Oh, wow. Digitally, I have no idea how this is going to look on video because this color range is so difficult to get accurate. But either way, so this was our original that we did. We went through what ended up being 4 iterations to come up with these colors. Back and forth and back and forth. But these are the final ones that we have now. So the final ones that we have are, oh gosh, where are the swabs? Did I not grab the actual final swabs? Wow. Good job, Brian. Yeah, I didn't. They're around. Jeez. Okay, hang on. Maybe cut this together so I stand up and then I sit right back down in the seat. Let me grab the actual colors. Ta-da! I'm back. Okay. These are the final ones that we ended up with. So I thought it'd be kind of neat to show you like some of the evolution that happens. Shimmer looks awesome. Like it just makes it look so much better. It looks so good, especially like with these color ranges. I didn't swap them in the same order, but here you go. So we got the tide pool teal, some beautiful shimmer in it. We got parrotfish purple, which I think might actually be my favorite of the bunch. The shimmer on the purple, it just looks so good. And then betafish blue is nice too. With that shimmer as well, a little bit of sheen going on in there. So we're really happy with how these turned out. But yeah, I thought that'd be kind of fun to show you a little bit how they evolved. And then I just wanted to maybe swab it and just lay it down for you so you get a sense of what it is. But yeah, so I have here my stuff that I use for all my showdowns, Growing Cleaner glass pen, and Kakamori. So I'm just going to shake them up a little bit because you get that shimmer going on. And I just want to make sure that I get it all mixed up and in suspension. So again, you've seen what it looks like in its like final form, right? And I wanted to show you that because it might take a little bit to dry like that. So here, betafish blue. So this is on Tomoe River paper over here. I've got, this is Clairefontaine Triomphe, which is very ink resistant paper as well, slightly different than the Tomoe. So I also thought that'd be kind of fun to show. So we have betafish blue. We had to double and triple check ourselves that this is how you spell betafish. I did not know that it has 2 T's. I swore that it was B-E-T-A for a long time. I never had a betafish, but my sister did. I also don't have a cup of water, so how are you gonna rinse this off, Brian? I really planned this well ahead of time. Okay, I found a bottle with some water in it that I had laying here. Rinse that off. Betafish blue, and then I'll do the Kakamori as well. Really nice looking color. So I like that as it goes down. It's pretty dark. The betafish blue ends up being kind of dark, actually. But again, I'm putting a pretty good amount of ink down. Let's see here. Let's do the next one. We'll do parrotfish purple. Why not? These are brand new. I've just opened these up. Okay, parrotfish. One word. Oh, this looks so good. So again, Glenn was photographing my bottles, so I just got them back today. So I have yet to actually ink it up into my own pen. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do that right now. Do I have a pen? Do I have a pen not inked up near me? Sure I do. I'm sure I do. Let me finish on doing one thing at a time. Okay, here's Parrotfish Purple. Oh, I just love that. Nice lavender color. Oh, I like it. As well I should, because why the heck did we do it if we didn't like it anyway? No, just the purple. The purple is a standout for me on this set. It's also cool, like just the paper towel. It's like a little chromatography type thing going on here. There's some cool colors coming out of that purple. Anyway, so maybe depending on the paper that you're using or whatever, you could pull out some interesting tones on the purple. Oh, that just looks so good. Okay, and then the tide pool teal will be the last one that I'll do. Ooh, this is dark. Yeah, this is dark. Okay, and Kakimori. That looks nice too. I'm really curious which color is going to sell better. Now, I will say the set, hopefully we've restocked it by the time this video publishes. We had a breakage happen when we received the initial shipment. Ruined a bunch of sets. But Monteverde's cool. They're good on it. They're going to help us out. But that's why we sold out of the sets so quickly, is because we had like a quarter of the shipment that we were intending to have of the sets. So, and normally it'd be like, oh, well, it's not that fancy of packaging. Couldn't you just repackage the bottles? Well, no, it was a mess. So we're getting replacements. Yeah, there you go. Really nice. Doesn't look that different than on Tomoe. Maybe you see a little more of the shimmer on the Tomoe. But my swabs are also smaller. You still can definitely see some good shimmer going on here. Nice colors. I'm really happy with how these turned out, to be honest with you. You know, ink is tough because there's so much ink out there. It's hard to know what's going to like add value to the fountain pen world. But we're pretty happy about these. I don't know how long we're going to have them. We got enough. We bought a pretty decent amount, but it's not like I'm sitting on mountains of the stuff. So if you're interested in these, I would say go ahead and get them sooner than later. You know, you've got a little bit of time, but, you know, I'm really curious to see how they're received. And that's all I got for you right now. I didn't do like extensive dry time testing or anything like that. Yeah, maybe I should have done that. I don't know. Let me know if y'all are interested. I can always do something else further, but that's what I got for you. And yeah, let's get into my adventures. All right, we'll sort of land the plane here on Q&A this week. I have some adventures. I don't have anything too crazy. I've been chilling. My kids are in summer mode. We are carting them around to the pool and to stuff with their friends all the time. So a lot of my life right now is just logistical, running around, nothing that exciting to share kind of stuff. But we did have our mental health half day. And I think I mentioned that I was going to a funeral. It was my neighbor's funeral. And it's kind of, you know, it's like with funerals, it's a gamble. You never know. Is it going to be like, you know, really sad and hard and all that kind of stuff? Or is it going to be like a celebration of life? This was a celebration of life kind of funeral. So yes, there was some sadness to it, but, you know, strong family, strong community ties. It was really good. It was really good. So I'm glad I went to that. And it was very convenient because it ended up being during our half day time. So it's like I didn't have to rearrange anything to be able to go. So I just was able to go and just, you know, pay my respects. And that was nice. And then another thing we did that day, me and several people on the team, is like, we've been in this building for 8 years now. You know, we renewed our lease and we're going to be here for a little while. So it was like, you know, just little dings and little spots happen, you know, just like wear and tear that happens just from being in a place for that long. So we're just going around and like touching up paint and, you know, stuff like that, just to like refresh a little bit, because like summertime's a little bit slower for us and all that. So it's like, you know what, let's freshen up the place a little bit. So did some of that, and that's fun. So just, making good use of our time there. And then at home, I've been just landscaping a lot, doing a lot of yard work, things like that. Battling weeds. Man, I keep pulling weeds and they keep growing back. We've had pretty heavy rains here and lots of sunlight here in Central Virginia, and just stuff is growing. So yeah, constantly fighting weed battles. So I did a big weed spraying effort this weekend. And drumming, more drumming. I'm taking lessons and stuff. I've been amazed at how much y'all have commented about drums. I had no idea we had so many drummers watching Q&A. It's been awesome. I feel a little bit like an imposter because I am really pretty new to drums, but I am picking up on it quickly. In my lesson this week, I'm learning the halftime shuffle, made famous by Bernard Purdy from Steely Dan. That has been hard, but really cool. So I'm practicing some of that right now, and getting into something like, that type of shuffle really isn't so many more songs than you realize. Specifically like "Fool in the Rain" from Led Zeppelin. Oh, that's a great song. So I'm going to be practicing that one too. So yeah, I've been doing that, just having a good time, just loving it. So yeah, any other suggestions y'all have for good drum stuff to look into, let me know. I had no thoughts really about drumming for most of my life as a musician, but really in the last few months, it's like I've been appreciating it so much more, and it just makes me appreciate like the whole ensemble of music so much more, just all bands, orchestra, everything. Percussion is really often overlooked. It's noticed, but overlooked and underappreciated. It is hard and takes a lot of practice. Anyway, props to our drummers out there. That's about it for me personally. So for this week, just want to thank you for watching. Hope y'all are enjoying your summertime, if it is summertime for you on the Northern Hemisphere. We got lots of fountain pen ink paper stuff here. Check out our website, gouletpens.com. And my fun fact for this week. So this time of year, we have, at least in these parts, something called June bugs or June beetles. They're starting to come out. I see them everywhere. They're pretty distinctive, especially where we are here in Central Virginia. We get a lot of the green ones. So they have like a very bright green shell. They fly around. They don't bite or sting or anything like that, but they're really prominent for like a few weeks out of the year, like late May into June. They're just starting to come out now. They're big, dumb bugs. They fly very clunky, and they're attracted to light. Scientists don't know why they're attracted to light. It's of no benefit to them. And they're really clumsy flyers, so they wear themselves out really quickly. So a lot of times they like fly around your porch lights, and then they just tire themselves out and they fall down and they like die on their backs. So you end up with these things everywhere. But a lot of, blue jays and crows like to eat them, and, raccoons and skunks and stuff like that. So anyway, I was just like really curious. I'm like, let me just research these June bugs. Why not? They're very popular in the U.S. especially. I don't know if they're on other continents or whatever, but I know in the U.S. they're pretty prominent here, really kind of all up and down the East Coast. But it goes out all the way even to California some. So I don't think I'm alone in experiencing these things. So the ones that we have here that are these green ones are the Coltinus nitida. These can be a lot of different colors like brown or black, but the bright green ones are the ones that stand out the most. Those are the ones I notice. The adults are only active for a few weeks out of the year, like around this like June timeframe, hence the name of the June bug. So they will burrow for winter time. Basically, once they mate, they burrow down into the ground. And they pretty much stay in the ground through winter until they die. The adults only live like a year, and they're only out for like a few weeks. So I'm like, wow, what an existence. But the female will lay hundreds of eggs that hatch into larvae, and those larvae live underground for like 3 years before they come out as adults, mate, and then die. So that most of the time they're living underground, and they can be somewhat beneficial because they like help to aerate the soil and stuff like that. But largely they're eating the roots of your grass. And so they're actually kind of a pest. They cause some harm, but in the grand scheme of things, I guess it's not that bad. But they're in the beetle family. But what's kind of crazy is I was like researching these June bugs specifically, and then I started to look into beetles, and I was like, oh, this is very interesting. I'm going to drop a couple fun facts here. So beetles, in general, have been estimated to have been on the Earth for 230 million years, which is a really long time. And it's estimated that 1/4 of all living animals on Earth right now are beetles. 1/4 of all living animals are beetles. Isn't that crazy? And I had to look that up because I was like, beetles aren't animals, because I think of like insects are not animals. No, they're animals. If it's like a living, breathing, entity. Well, I don't know. I guess technically flowers breathe, but basically any fauna, insects fall into that category. And what was also crazy is there are currently 350,000 known species of beetles and more that they're categorizing every day. There's about 30,000 species in the US. I'm like, 350,000 is a lot. That's just individual species of beetles that we have categorized. That's insane. That's so many bugs. The world is an amazing place. That's my fun fact for you this week. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next week. Thanks for watching, and right on.